todos a la segunda plenaria del día de hoy. Es de verdad un verdadero placer contar con la presencia de Aziz Abu Zara, explorador de National Geographic. De verdad, les deseo que disfruten esta charla tanto como yo he disfrutado las otras ponencias que he visto de Aziz. Y Jaime, por favor, si nos puedes hacer el favor de hacer la presentación de Aziz.
Thank you very much, and good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening to all of our participants in this International Congress on Language Learning. We're on our first day. Depending on what part of the world you're in, have a great day, or great night, a great evening, great morning. We're very happy to introduce to you Aziz Abu Zara, and I'm going to just read a quick little biodata about him before his presentation. He is a peace-building entrepreneur, author, and international speaker, a Palestinian raised in Jerusalem. His work has earned him the titles of National Geographic Explorer and TED Fellow. This Palestinian's own journey from combatant seeking revenge to peacemaker seeking tolerance led to an innovative business method of peacemaking in conflict zones. Aziz has spoken at numerous international organizations, corporations, and universities, including the United Nations, Nexus, TED, BMW, European Parliament, Georgetown, Yale, and Harvard. He has published articles in the New York Times, National Geographic, Haaretz, and the Jerusalem Post. He regularly does analysis for CNN, Fox, and Al Jazeera. Aziz is the recipient of the Goldberg Prize for Peace in the Middle East from the Institute of International Education, the European Parliament's Silver Rose Award, the Eisenhower Medallion, and the Eliav Satari Award for his Middle Eastern journalism. He was named one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world by the Royal Strategic Center in Jordan. From 2010 to 2014, he won the Intercultural Innovation Award from the UN Alliance of Civilizations and the BMW Group. He was also recognized by former United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon for his work in peace building. In 2018, Aziz received international media coverage when he announced his decision to seek the office of mayor of Jerusalem. In addition, in 2018, Strangers, Neighbors, Friends, Muslim, Christian, Jewish Reflections on Compassion and Peace was published. A book was published and co-written by Aziz. And today, Aziz is going to share with us his conference, Crossing Boundaries, How Learning a New Language Changed My Life. And welcome, Aziz. We're very happy to have you here with us. And for all of our participants, remember that you can, if you have any questions or commentary, you can please put them into the chat, which we will be reading on or translating if necessary at the end of the participation. So the mic is yours, Aziz. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate the invite and appreciate being with you. If I say anything that's not clear, please stop me, ask me. I'm totally fine with that. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about my story and some of the work I've been doing, especially in travel, and how that has really transformed me. And I think the power, not just of learning a language, but the power of being able to communicate. I've worked in the last 20 years in over 60 countries around the world. I've spent quite a lot of time in Latin America and South America, been almost everywhere, not everywhere yet, but it'll happen. And it's, I always say it's my favorite continent, region to visit, although because I don't yet speak Spanish, which is something really often needs to change. And I tried last year to learn, then got too busy with work and stopped. But I remember being on my way to Mexico when the flight attendant, I was flying with Air Mexico, I think, right? That's the name for it. And the flight attendant was not sure why I couldn't speak Spanish, because I look like I should be able to speak Spanish, but I didn't. And in her mind, I was a Hispanic who just wants to speak English and being too arrogant to speak Spanish. So she kept talking to me in Spanish, and which was cool. I understood most of what she said. I responded in English, and eventually I figured out she thought I was just being mean. But through the whole thing, it worked out until it came to food. And it was a problem because I have some food I couldn't eat because of allergies. And that's when I learned, at least, even if you don't speak a language, you always have to learn how to communicate important things. And so since then, I decided to learn some Spanish, very broken Spanish that would help me when I'm travel, which is things like I know, like I'm from the Middle East, del Oriente Medio, no habla español o poquito habla español, tengo una alergia a los mariscos, no me mates por favor. And that has been amazing. It worked everywhere in Latin America. So that's just a little bit about the power of language. I want to tell you about where I grew up. I grew up in Jerusalem. This is a photo from my neighborhood. And if you follow the news in Jerusalem, you know that it's unfortunately has been a space of conflict almost for the last 100 years. And to grow up in a place of conflict is very different than anything else you could imagine. It's not normal, but if you're growing up there, that is normal. And this kind of scenery of a destroyed house, having kids playing there, thinking this is normal, is something I grew up with. I've seen all the time. I've lived it myself. I had family whose homes were destroyed, and that becomes, oh, it's okay. I remember when I was, I don't know, 7, 8 years old, and I was in school, and I came back, and I told my mother that I've made a decision that I'm not going to school anymore. And you can imagine, like any mother, my mom looked at me and she said, "You're 8 years old. You can't make such a decision." And I made a case for her. I said, "Look, on the way back from school, we were fired at tear gas. And I almost suffocated. I almost died. And I thought about how important education is. And I don't think it's more important than life. Therefore, I think I have a very good case. I don't need to wake up tomorrow early. I don't need to go to school. I can sleep in and have a good life, not going to school." And obviously, my mom had to sit me down and talk to me. But that was such a normal thing for a kid to be fired at tear gas. It's terrifying. So my mom sat me down and eventually agreed to find a solution, which the solution was she would give me an onion every day. And if you don't know why an onion is very, well, let me ask, anybody in the messages can say why an onion? Why did my mom decide to give me an onion? You can respond in the messages. Let's see. I'll get you more involved this way. Give me some thoughts. Why would my mom give me an onion to deal with my fear? Any of you have been to a protest before? So here, this wasn't the purpose of this conversation, but you'll learn. Onion, no, that's good. It teaches you how to cry. No, actually, if you fire that tear gas, onion, if you put it close to your nose, it would stop you from suffocating. It keeps your breathing happening. It's hard to breathe next on onion. It keeps you crying, but it keeps your ability to breathe. And so my mom taught me to basically use an onion if there's tear gas, and it actually worked. Unfortunately, that I did have to use it. So this is just to explain a little bit about growing up in a conflict zone, where at 8 years old, you actually get to learn things like, oh, how do I survive if there's a tear gas? What do I do if there's a military in my neighborhood? Things like that normal kids should not know. And I grew up thinking this is how every kid in the world goes to school. I thought you are in Mexico. If you going to school when you were 8, 9 years old, you probably took an onion with you. And it took me years later to realize, no, that's not normal. You don't take an onion with you when you go to school. That's actually exactly the opposite of what it should be. So just a bit more about myself. I'm the youngest of 7 kids. We're a big family. I was supposedly, I'm a mistake. I'm an oops child. Wasn't planned for it. And I came 9 years after the last brother was born. He's right here next to me. Taysir was 9 years older than me. It also meant he was the person in charge of my life. He's the person who took me to school. You know, when you're a big family, the parents don't really spend as much time on the last kid as they did on the first kid. Also, he's the one who I argued with the most, but also who has helped me the most. If I had a problem in school, he's the one who would come and sort it, which is much, much better than having your parents come to school and hear if you're misbehaving. Your brother can relate to it because he wasn't himself is still in school. So he took my side more than he would take the teacher's side when there was an issue. But when I was 9 years old, Taysir, who you see here, was arrested from home. He was arrested on suspicion of throwing rocks at soldiers, Israeli soldiers, and he refused to confess to the charges, so he was beaten up. And soon after he was released from prison, he ended up dying from the results of the beating. I was 10 years old when he died, and he was 19. And I want you to think, how would you have responded if you were 10 years old and you see your brother being killed? What would you do? What's the first thing that comes to your mind in such a situation, in such a condition? Everything is good, everything is normal, and then your brother being taken from home. We shared the same room, me and him, and then suddenly he gets released from prison and he's dead. How would you respond to this? Anger, right? Shocked. Somebody here said happened to them. It's your parents didn't let you in the funeral. I'm sorry. Can't imagine the situation, right? It's so hard to extreme sadness. The world feels like it's tearing apart. All of those feelings. But there's one more feeling that I had, which is, it felt like if somebody had punched me in the face. I still remember the faces of the soldiers who came into our home and took my brother. And so anger, I would add bitterness. I would add this feeling of avenging. And it almost felt like if somebody had walked to me and just went, bam, I punched me right in the face. And if somebody punches you in the face, what's your first response? How do we automatically respond? If somebody, you're walking, everything is going fine, you don't know this person, they come to you and they're like, bam, they just punch you in the face. How many people here would really, if somebody punch you in the face, go, okay, I need to be rational, especially if you're 10 years old. I need to be rational. I need to take a few steps backward and think about this and not jump into conclusions. Yeah, first you might hide, you might want to protect yourself, or you might hit back. You might punch, exactly. Thank you, Juan. You might punch back. And that's how I felt. I felt I've been punched in the face again and again and again. And that the only response I have or I can or should do is to punch back. And for the next few years, that's what I did. I was very angry, very bitter, and all I wanted to do is revenge. It's something that I see it now when I think about it all over the world. This kind of anger, this kind of bitterness, this feeling is I need to hurt the person who hurt me. That's how I grew up. And until that time, until I was 18 years old, from 10 till 18, I never really had a normal conversation with any Israeli Jewish person. Now, this is absolutely crazy because I want you to understand how close we lived. If I walked from my house in East Jerusalem about 10 minutes, I would be in a Jewish neighborhood. And yet, never met, never talked. The only thing I knew is the soldiers who arrested and killed my brother. But we never had any communication. And then this division, these walls that we create that are not physical walls like this one, these walls that we create around us, walls that are because of our ignorance, because of our anger, because of our hatred, are such a powerful thing. We're so close physically, and yet we were so far. We're so close, we could know each other, and yet we demonize and we dehumanize each other. And especially when we have actual experiences, especially when we have something that happened to us. And so when I finished high school, And I was very active politically, and I wrote for or edited a youth magazine that was very angry youth magazine, kind of similar to today's world media of who's right and who's wrong. Always we are right, regardless which side, and always everybody else is wrong. I realized I made a big mistake. And the mistake was I refused to learn Hebrew growing up. To me, Hebrew was the language of the enemy, the language of the other. And in Jerusalem, you can't not speak Hebrew. If you don't speak Hebrew, if you don't communicate in Hebrew, you don't get a job, you don't go to college. And so when I finished high school, I found myself stuck with not speaking the language. And I started looking for the best place to learn Hebrew. And the best place to learn Hebrew is a place called Ulpan, which is where Jewish immigrants go to learn Hebrew. And I was the only Palestinian Jewish immigrants to Israel. So if there's a Mexican Jew or Uruguayan Jew or French Jew moving to Israel, that's where they go to learn Hebrew. Usually not many people like me. So I signed up for one of those classes. And it was extremely difficult because that was my first time sitting with the people that I saw as enemies in the same classroom. I thought everybody there hated me. I was sure they don't like me, talking about lack of communication, inability to understand each other. And I sat like this, put my hands around, and I was like, I'm not talking to anyone. I'm here to learn Hebrew because of my future, my education, my work. I'm not here to make friends, and I'm not talking to anyone. Can you see what's wrong with my plan? For anybody here who works in language learning, can you learn a language without talking to people? Not really. If you want to learn a language, you have to talk to the people with you in the class. And I was very amazed because I had the most incredible teacher I could have asked for, a Jewish Israeli woman who on day one of my class, she walked to me, she knew I'm probably feeling uncomfortable, and she welcomed me in Arabic. She knew very few Arabic words, my native language, and she welcomed me in that language. And her doing that was already breaking so many barriers, was already breaking so many walls, because she saw me for the first time as a human being, or that's how I felt, that finally somebody who I thought always sees me as an enemy is seeing me as a person. And in the next few months, she did the same thing. She was so out of her way. She would go so out of her way to welcome me, to make me feel included. She would do things that other teachers, and I took other language classes, would never have done. Like she would say, why don't you bring some Arabic music and me and you can sit and we will translate it together to Hebrew so I can help you with understanding how to translate. And then we will play it for the class and tell them the different words and show them how Arabic and Hebrew are really close. The two languages are very, very similar. And so we would do things like that. And she didn't have to do it, but she understood that her job wasn't just to teach a language. Her job was to teach communication. Her job was to also help us understand each other. And so we would, each week, one of the students would prepare a presentation about their culture, what they do, the different things they practice, things they want to tell us about their life. And it made us slowly, as students, get to like each other, get to want to spend time with each other, go drink coffee with each other. Although we would argue about what's the best coffee, because Israelis like this horrible coffee called Nescafe, instant coffee. It's the worst thing on earth. And then I like Arabic coffee, which is thick and strong and just really good. And so we'll argue over coffee, but that's okay. We will never agree on everything. But we agreed on becoming friends. And as we started to get to know each other, we realized how many misconceptions, how many things that are not true that we have learned about each other growing up. And there's a very famous poem by an Irish poet who his name is Padraig Ó Tuama, and he says, He says that when I was a child, I learned to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But now that he's grown up, I had to relearn how to count. He says, now I count one life, one life, one life, one life, because each time that life has been taken, it matters. And it kind of changes your whole perspective to unlearn the things that we knew, we thought we were sure about, and relearn it, re-understand who's the other that lives right across from my house. It is learning communication. And by the way, it is language, but it's not just language. It's a way that we think. It's the way that we train ourselves. Martin Luther King Jr. had a lot to say about that. And it's one of those extremely powerful quotes where he says, men often hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they cannot communicate. They cannot communicate because they are separated. And I love this quote because it explains the majority of the problems I believe we have in the world today is so much fear, so much ignorance. And then out of that fear and out of that ignorance, so many conflicts everywhere you look around. And what we really need to learn is how to communicate with each other, not just how to speak the same language, but go beyond that. Speak the same language, be able to talk to each other, but also learn how to communicate. Not, I'm going to say what I have to say. I want to say it in a way that makes you listen to me, makes you understand me. And that's what my Hebrew teacher did in that classroom. She went beyond teaching us just Hebrew. She taught us different cultures because American culture isn't what English is about. We needed to learn to communicate our own culture or English culture or Australian culture, whichever country speaking English. No, we had to communicate who we are. We had to understand that English is spoken by more people who are not native than those who are native. So we had to learn how to communicate with each other. And that to me was so important, and it set me on a journey that has just been so powerful. Years later, I ended up meeting with this guy. His name is Scott Cooper. And Scott is a Jewish American guy. I'm Palestinian. And we worked together in many conflicts around the world. We worked in Afghanistan together. We worked in Syria together. We worked in Latin America together. And then we decided that this communication thing, we need to find a better avenue to help people communicate. Whether they speak the language or they don't speak the language, we need to help people to communicate. And through doing so much work, we actually came to an idea is that the best way to help people communicate is through speaking, through meeting people as we travel. And we felt so much of the travel that's happening around the world is all about seeing things and not experiencing. And if we want to change the world we live in, we need to learn to communicate with people everywhere. And so we started a travel company. We called it Mejdi Tours. Mejdi is an Arabic word that means honor and respect. And we decided to work on communication everywhere we could operate. So for example, in Jerusalem, you see this photo from Jerusalem. Instead of having one tour guide, we decided to have two. One Jewish and one Arab. Now, if you ask anybody, and we did before we started the tour company, what do you think about this idea? Instead of one tour guide, we have two tour guides who might disagree on culture and history and politics. And everybody we talked to, unlike Veronica, everybody said, this is a dumb idea, don't do it. This is too stupid. People not gonna want to talk about these things when they travel. Being stubborn, we decided we will do it. And it was incredible. And still going. This idea started more than 10, 11 years ago and still going on, not just in Jerusalem, in over 24 countries around the world, where you have multiple views. People see communication between those who disagree with each other. The Israeli guy and the Palestinian guy don't always agree, but they don't fight. They learn how to communicate. And the group, the tourists who are coming, they are also able to communicate. And this is something that when I went to school was so missing in my classroom. We learned everything as one perspective, one opinion, there were very little of this dissidence, this idea of not everything is an absolute truth. Sometimes there are opinions. Sometimes we see things from a different perspective, and it's okay. We can be friends and we can argue our points, debate our points, but we don't have to always agree. We realize that two opinions aren't enough. Let's include the locals in our communications, in our trips. And so eating with locals in their homes. This is me recruiting my mother to do cooking for my group. And this is the best dish you can ever eat. It's chicken with rice and tons of spices. Talking about communication and across culture, some of the spices we use on our most famous dishes, like this one called maqlube, actually come from Latin America, which is, to me, is amazing how much we borrow from each other, but we don't even know it. If you ask anyone in the Middle East, where is allspice come from? Where is potato coming from? All these things that we use so regularly, or tomato, we use so regularly in our food, they wouldn't know that it's coming from the Americas. And the same vice versa. There's so many things here that came from other parts, like cumin, for example, which has become very big in some Latin American countries. I think Mexico is one of the big producers of cumin. It comes from Asia and the Middle East. So this is all good things, but we never talk about those because we don't communicate enough. We only hear all the things that kind of demonize the other instead of making us get to know each other better. Now, when I say all of that, people say, so you don't have much fun when you travel. There's so much heavy and new conversations, and that's not true. You can have so much fun when you travel. This is in Jordan, in Petra, and one of our travelers having a fun conversation, I guess, with the camel. But you can have fun and get to know people and get to connect with those you are meeting and get to dance and just listening to the different kinds of music, get to hear stories that you would never heard otherwise. This is an American traveler meeting with a Bedouin community, a nomadic community in the country. And I'll go through a couple of examples of that. But the most important to me is that as we travel and we meet people who are different than us and we communicate with them, that improves our communications, not just in our travels, but in general. I just came back from Poland 2 days ago, where, as you probably know, there's right next door in Ukraine, there's a war. 2 million refugees have already got into Poland. And when I went there, I wanted to hear and I wanted to meet some of those refugees, and I did. And one thing that blew my mind, and I couldn't believe I follow the news like crazy, and I have not heard almost anything about it, is the radical hospitality that people in Poland had. And I would go to these centers where refugees are, and you can see Polish people coming in and saying, I have an extra bedroom in my house, or I got a living room. I can have 2 people, or I can have 4 people come and live with me until they get a job, they can make a living, and they can do it. And I worked in so many countries where refugees have been, with Syrian refugees, with Venezuelan refugees. And I've never seen such radical hospitality where tens of thousands of people opening their homes in a way that was, to me, was unprecedented. And it's a story that we should learn about. If you are traveling to a place like Poland to meet those refugees, to meet those people who are opening their homes. I went and visited one of those homes. I talked to those families. I wanted to hear their stories and why they're doing what they're doing. This is what makes us much better human beings. You know, we learn those things. We get inspired from each other. That's learning how to communicate better. And then we figure out, what is it that I can do in those kind of situations? Who am I welcoming into my home? it also, as we travel, and this is true whether you're traveling far away or whether you are in your own city, in your own town, is finding the missing stories around you. One of my favorite destinations is Mexico for sure, but also Colombia. As I said, Latin America is a place I truly love. And I enjoy those kind of stories that are missing, that I feel people don't know, like the biodiversity in that region, all the fruits I ate in the market that I never have heard of before. And some of them are amazing stuff that I couldn't believe I've never tried. But also learning about history, learning about conflicts, learning about challenges. This is a guy in Bogota in a neighborhood called Egipto who used to be a gang leader, who, after going to prison last time, decided, I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want people to die in my family. He had 7 people in his family killed in gang fights. And instead of what he told me, my biggest claim to fame used to be going and stealing phones and wallets from tourists. Now he became a tour guide. And he would take people into his neighborhood, tell them about the history of the neighborhood, how it ended up where it ended up. There's tons of graffiti around there. Then go and have tea or coffee with him in his home. And it's a job. You pay him for it. And it's incredible to be learning those stories that many people go to Bogota. They'll go to the Gold Museum. They'll go up to the Christ statue, but never get to hear those kind of stories, the missing story. And when I left Bogota, this is a story that I could never forget. This is the most powerful thing I could hear. That's a power, but that you don't need to travel so far away to hear those stories. Some of them exist in our own neighborhoods. We just never heard it. I met people in Bogota who didn't know where Egipto is. And I encourage them to say, don't just think of travel 5,000 miles away. Think of the stories in your own neighborhood and help promote these stories. Help people to know these stories. That's part of communication, is getting those stories out. Ibn Battuta, who's a very famous Arab traveler from 700, 800 years ago, has this quote that says, travel makes you speechless, but then it turns you into a storyteller. And I love this saying, travel makes you speechless, but then it turns you into a storyteller. This is my trip to Peru, and I love photography. I love fun things. I woke up very early so I can get up before so many tourists are there. And then I had to negotiate because of my negotiation peace building background with this lama and convince her to pose for me in the photo, which I was successful. But when I think of my time in Peru, as much as I love this photo and I love spending time doing photography, it's this that I remember the most, going into a village and just walking around and then meeting this girl who decided to become my tour guide. As you know, my Spanish is terrible. Her English is terrible. But she took my hand and walked me into her home. And I met the family and I drank some mate and tea and we didn't really fully understand each other, but we did. We were able to communicate. And I wish I spoke the language because it would have been 10 times probably more powerful. But still, to me, people are the center of everything we should do. And when I think of Peru, this is what I remember. This is, to me, the powerful story. This is Vietnam. Again, it is so beautiful. One of the most beautiful countries you will see. But when I think of Vietnam, I think of this woman, not these beautiful photos, which again, I spent such a long time trying to get the right shot. But I think of this woman, her smile, her story. She was 90 years old when I met her, and how she lived through so many wars and so many conflicts. And yet she could not stop smiling and laughing the whole time. That's what I remember. That's the powerful thing about communication, is that when you're able to communicate with somebody, when you're able to see somebody's heart, when you're able to understand where they're coming from, all our stereotypes, all our negative ideas about what the other is, all that fear that we talked about, you learn to love instead of to fear. And it changes the whole world around us. There are 1.4 billion people who traveled internationally before the pandemic every year. I want you to imagine with me, if every one of those 1.4 billion people communicated with the people wherever they went, connected with those people, understood their stories, what would happen in our world? Would we have as many conflicts? Would we have as many wars? Would we have as many misunderstandings, as many stereotypes of like, oh, because of the skin color, or because of how somebody looks, or because of how they speak, or because whatever the reason is, would we have so much fear of each other? And I strongly believe no. If we able to communicate, if we able to see, if we able to connect and have experiences with people, it would change who we are completely. So I want to leave you with that thought. If there's one thing to take with you, is reach out to somebody who's different. Try to communicate with them. Even if you can't speak the perfect language with each other, it doesn't always, it's not communication, not 100% built on language. Language is very powerful and very important. And if I didn't speak English, unfortunately, many of these stories would have been hard for me to understand. But it goes beyond the language. It goes through listening, asking questions, saying, I want to know who you are, not just what do you believe about politics or religion, all of that. I want to hear your stories. That's what makes us fall in love with people. That's what makes us fall in love with the humanity. And that's what would transform us. So I got a few minutes, I think, to answer if you have any questions. And just again, thank you so much. Thank you for all the comments. I was reading them as I'm going through, and thank you so much for all these comments. It's I love how you continued interacting with me through the comments, and it means a lot.
Thank you, Aziz. This is the fourth time I've heard your story, and it's deeply moving, and it always reminds me of the huge responsibility we have as language teachers and language professionals. As you said, language is not the end, but it's the tool that takes you to that end. And it's a very, I mean, everybody has powerful ends for that tool. So I'm really grateful for your presence here, for sharing your stories with us. And for all our participants, Aziz has kindly given us a sample of the book he has written on travel and language. And at the end of the plenary session, you will get this sample on your mails. Okay.
Yes, I'd also like to thank Aziz for this wonderful presentation, and I agree completely with Maestra Gabi that on the power of travel and the power of language, and how that power actually can manifest itself in human interactions and in peace building. And also, I'd like And meanwhile, participants, please feel free to send in more comments, or if you have any questions for our lecturer today, Aziz Abu Sarah. And meanwhile, see if any questions come in. I'd like to thank I don't have everybody's names. There's the chat's just been going crazy, but Mr. Recio, Juan Castañeda, Maite Mayen, Veronica Lagos, Dilvi Santa Maria, Lucy Montes, Alicia de Jesus Solis, Shelb, Paulina, Claudia Garcia Moreno are just some of the people that have been filling the chat with wonderful comments that you've been reading as well, Aziz. And I'd also like to just take an advantage right now and thank our sponsors for the International Congress on Language Learning. We have the sponsorship from ITEP, from Anglo Morelia, and from Innova Brains. Thank you very much to those people for helping us to make this all possible. And of course, thanks to the National University of Mexico and to the Escuela Nacional de Estudios Superiores for allowing the language departments, the various language departments at the school to organize this event also.
Jaime,
let's
we
see.
have a couple of questions. Yes, Aziz, they are asking for
Okay.
the last slide. And also, Shelb is asking if you have any tips on how to learn a language, things that have worked for you that you can share with us.
Yeah, so I learned English and Hebrew growing up. Both I did it the same way. I just try to speak that language as much as I can. And even when I didn't know enough, I just didn't care if somebody thought I made a mistake, and I made tons of mistakes. I still do, and it's okay. Making mistakes are right. Don't be afraid to speak the language. Don't be afraid to write in the language. I've written articles for publications that, like New York Times or like for National Geographic. My English is still not perfect. That's why there are editors. I'm not afraid to write it and send it and say, my idea is more important than how perfect my English is. So keep trying, never stop practicing. Practice makes us better. There are some idea that if I don't become perfect, then something's wrong. Now, practice doesn't always make you perfect. It just makes you better. And sometimes better is all you need.
Yes, an agreement. And we have some more questions here. And just a little shout out to Shelby. I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name, Shelby. Shelby, thank you very much. We have one question here from Veronica Lagos about about your experience with photography. She's asking about her son who loves photography. He's 19, and you are such an inspiration. Do you have any tips for him?
Sure.
And also, Mr. Recio I'm just going to say a couple more questions. Mr. Recio asks, is money, well, of course, language can be somewhat of a symbolic currency to travel, but is money an obstacle for you to travel?
So for the photography question, photography is an amazing thing because I'm talking about perspectives. And when you learn photography, you learn perspectives. You learn that different things look differently depending on where you're standing, depending on the light, depending on all these elements. When you take the photo, you learn that sometimes you have to get up. It's a lot of work to see other perspectives. When I'm traveling and I want to take photos, my time is very different. I wake up at 4:30 in the morning, get ready for the sunrise because that's the best time for photography. I make sure I'm free at sunset because that's important for light. So it changes who you are. So I would say two things. One, get your kid to practice as much as possible. Second, it's all about the perspective and the framing. Yeah, you can have your son join a class, and I think that definitely would help on the main aspect of, learning aperture and shutter and all of these. But it's really mostly the eyes, teaching him or explaining that try to take the same photo always from multiple perspectives and trying to take it with different settings and see what you like, see who you are as a photographer. And each person is very different. Some of the greatest photographers I know who work for publications, again, like National Geographic, you'd be amazed. They'll tell you it's all about training your eye to see the unusual, training your eye to be what is missing here? What do I want? Where are the shades, the light? What would make me think about this differently? What is the image I want out of this? So just encouraging your son to do that. And then money, yeah, money can be a problem. It was for a long time for me, not just money, even the passport. I grew up without a passport. It was a nightmare for me to travel anywhere in the world, in addition to the cost. So a few things. One, if you can't travel because of money, you can travel sometimes even without leaving. Virtual travel now has become something. But two, try to meet the tourists who come into your city and travel through talking to them. So that's one. Second, there are ways to travel without spending a lot of money. I think, to me, travel isn't about a 5-star hotel. If you have the money, that's fine. But there are ways to travel, meet people, and not spend as much money. And I think sometimes those are more fun ways to travel than staying in a 5-star hotel. And I've done both. I've stayed in hostels, I've met people, and I've stayed in their homes. Like, I met tourists who came to Jerusalem and became friends. And then when I traveled to their country, they just offered me to stay on their couch. And so I didn't need to spend any hotel money. And we ate in the house a lot of times. And so it wasn't too crazy expensive. So there are ways around dealing with the financial aspect. And finally, don't think of travel as far. Again, you could travel to another city close by, to another village. You can do things local. Not all travel is about getting on a plane and going so far away.
Okay, thank you. We have one question about this presentation. I'll just let some of the organizers answer that question for you from Mayen. And I'll jump to the next one by Susi Rodriguez. I'm going to read this one. You shared your experience with refugees and your experience in Poland. Maybe I am wrong, but it seems to me that other refugees around the world are definitely not treated the same way.
Right.
How could we contribute to a more human and humane way of treating each other? I often wonder, and I think your talk is inspiring.
You are absolutely right. Like I said, I worked in so many places where, for example, in some countries, our refugee camps where the same refugees stayed in those refugee camps for 5 years or 6 years, unable to leave the camp, unable to get a job, unable to learn, unable anything. And by the time they leave that refugee camp, they mentally unable to comprehend life, normal life again. It's such a humiliating thing to live in a camp for so long, live in a tent for so long. If you're a father or mother not being able to provide for your children, you're living on charity. It's a horrible thing. What happens in Poland is a great example for all of us. So what we can do, us doing exactly what these people doing, look at people in need and stepping in to help ourselves and not always think, what can government necessarily do? By the way, the government in Poland didn't really initiate all of this. It's the people who did. And it has helped the government to be able to get that many refugees because people are stepping in. So what we can do is look in our areas, and there are people who are in need. There are refugees in more than one place. I'm not sure where you are, and we can help there. We can reach out to organizations working with refugees and ask how we can help. Sometimes it might be teaching English, for example, to those refugees, or teaching Spanish if they're coming from countries that don't speak Spanish. Sometimes it's as simple as inviting them to come and have a meal with you. I have friends who are doing that here in the States with refugees coming in. Is just saying, I'm going to help you deal through bureaucracy. Let's figure out what the bureaucracy, you need a driver license, you need this, you need that. I'm going to help you and go with you to these offices to do it. It's not only donating money. It's the easiest thing. I think donating your time and expertise as a local to support people is even much more important. And there are many organizations who need a lot of volunteers.
Well, we have another question, which is what Maestra Gabi was just mentioning a little while ago about your most recent book. And we have one person asking, Miriam Aguilar, actually asking, how can she get the book?
It's on multiple websites. I'm gonna add my personal website, and there should be a few websites you can find it on, including obviously Amazon and a few others. So you can definitely check those. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's the website. It's in your chat. If you're listening and you haven't been checking your chat, please check the chat. You're going to see a website there. That's where you can find Aziz's latest book and more information on his travels and his work and his peace building efforts. Someone else, Nancy, asks, can anyone share websites to offer volunteer work as language teachers? And I'm sure there's lots of those around. So if anybody wants to pitch in any ideas, that will be more than welcome. And let's see, Maestra Gabi, I don't know, do we have any more questions remaining?
I can take one more question, then I have to run to my next thing.
No, Aziz, I think that's, I mean, there are lots of comments congratulating you and thanking you for your talk. But no more questions. And well, if you can stop sharing, please, so I can share something else.
Absolutely. Oops.
Okay. We have just a minute. Yeah. We have a certificate for you to thank you for your presence here.
Thank you.
As I've said, I've seen you present in multiple occasions, and I'm a big fan of your work. It's always a pleasure because as I said, it reminds me of the importance of learning languages, teaching languages, and helping people to acquire languages. So Jaime, would you like to read this in English for Aziz, please?
Oh boy. Okay. Well, so the second International Congress of Language Learning, on behalf of the Escuela Nacional de Estudios Superiores, Unidad Morelia, from the National University of Mexico, gives this certificate of participation to Aziz Abu Sara for his collaboration as a conference lecturer in the second International Congress of Language Learning that was celebrated from the 6th from April 6th to 8th, 2022, and it's signed by the general coordinator of the event, Maestra Karina Godina Sepulveda.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
No, we are so grateful for your presence, for all the efforts you made to be here. We know that you have other commitments. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Right.
thank you
Bye-bye.
very, very much.
Thank you, everyone.
And for everybody, don't forget to check out Aziz's website and his tour agency. It's really, really amazing. So go take a look at it. Vamos a tomar unos minutitos para preparar nuestra siguiente ponencia. Los dejamos con un mensaje de nuestros patrocinadores y nos vemos en un par de minutitos. Ya está aquí conectado el licenciado Sergio Mendoza. También es una gran charla y no se desconecten. Volvemos en unos instantes.